What number is that? Is it a 4? Is it a 9? It's not a number I recognise, and that's what this video is about. I think most people would recognise all three of these numbers as the number 1, and of course they're all written slightly differently. So what number is that? Of course it looks a bit like the number 1 above it, but it could also look a little bit like a number 2. And what about that number? Well, I suppose it looks a little bit like the number 1 above it, but it also looks a little bit like the number 7. At what point does the number 1 start looking like a number 7? And of course there's a sliding scale. Perhaps you decide the imaginary line is here, with everything this side of the line being a number 1, and everything on the other side of the line being a number 7. But different people will draw that line in the sand in different places. We can do a similar exercise with the number 2, of course. Is that a G or a number 9? And how soon until it starts looking like a number 8? Is that a 5 or an S? Is that 45 or 4S? Where on this sliding spectrum does the 5 end and the S begin? This is clearly a W. This is not a W. This is an omega. So what about that? It's curved at the bottom, but it goes straight out at the top. I bet you think this is a P. Maybe you think that's a rho. Maybe you think that's a P. Where does the P end and the rho begin? How small does the V have to be a lowercase v? And how big does it have to be a capital V? And where does the V turn into a U? These sorts of problems are a real issue for examiners, because we have to assume that the wrong interpretation of the hieroglyphic you've given on that page is the correct interpretation. What I mean is, if there's some uncertainty about whether what you've written is a U or a V, and the correct answer is a V, then I have to assume that what you've written is a U. If you've written your answer like this, and the correct answer is 95, I have to assume that is a number 4. And if you've written that and the correct answer is 45, then I have to assume that is a 9. I see these issues all the time, within examining, but also in the classroom. And students often find it very insulting when you pick up on their handwriting and say it's an issue. But it is an issue. And the issue is made worse by the fact that now, especially due to COVID-19, much of the work that teachers are seeing may very well be word processed. So their handwriting is not being looked at as often as it used to be. And therefore these common ways of writing numbers and letters that could be misinterpreted are slipping through the net and not being noticed. What students must do is a process called disambiguation. They have to read what they have written and think to themselves, could it be misinterpreted? They have to be critical when looking at their handwriting. Now in physics, we very, very rarely are going to want you to write long passages where handwriting has to be fast and neatness goes second place. We're more often going to be concerned with making sure your answers are correct in as few words as you can write, which means that you can take the time to make sure your words are well formed. Your letters and numbers, especially in equations, are unambiguous. This equation that I've just written here appears at A-level physics, and you'll notice it has 2 V's in it. One is capital, one is lowercase. And the examiner's guidance is very clear. If in a question students are examined on this step, they have to write this step to get the mark, and students do not make it clear which is the capital V and which is the lowercase v, they will not get that mark. This equation is a GCSE equation. The change in pressure at a depth due to a fluid is equal to the density of that fluid multiplied by the gravitational field strength multiplied by the depth of that fluid. It's got P and rho in the same equation, and so it has to be absolutely clear to the examiner which one is P and which one is rho. Do not write your 4s like this, because in a rush it turns into a 9. The same goes for this. In a rush, it starts to look a little bit too much like a 9. This seems to be a very popular way of writing the number 4. I'm not a fan of it, but it's certainly unambiguous. My preferred 4 is this one, and I take my time when I write it. I slow down because I want to make sure the examiner knows what I mean. When I write my numbers, personally, I do not put a little serif on the top of my number 1. I think it takes too long. I also prefer not to draw a line horizontally through my 7. But that's a personal choice. A line horizontally through the 7 might make it clearer, but certainly looking at these numbers, whether there's a line horizontally through the 7 or not, whether there's a serif on the 1 or not, there's no ambiguity about what those numbers are. And to make sure of that, I formed those numbers carefully and slowly. Now this could be misinterpreted. What I've drawn there could be a number 1, or it could be a lowercase l, or it could be a capital I. To make it clear, if it's a capital I in equations, I will always put these little serifs at the top and bottom to make it absolutely clear that that is a capital I. I don't do that in my normal handwriting, but I do it when I write equations. This is how I write my lowercase l's. It's not an E, because an E would be this height on my equation. It is clearly not an E, it's far too long. This is a script version of a lowercase l, and you'll find many physicists use this so that there's no ambiguity. An L is clearly not the number 1. So back to my original question. Is this hieroglyphic here a 4 or a 9? When I read this, I see a number 9. But I have marked every single year exam papers and test papers where my students have been adamant that's the number 4. Just make your handwriting clearer. Slow down, make sure there's no ambiguity, and make sure that you're not throwing away perfectly good marks that you deserve for getting the physics right. And if you found this video helpful, please do subscribe to my channel. That way you get updates when there's new videos or when I go live. And do show it to your friends or anyone else who you think may benefit from seeing this. Thank you.